Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha with Ice Cream Fitness here. I'm going back to something I started doing a couple months ago but quit now that my subscriber base has picked up a bit. And I'm going to go back to doing Q&As on Monday. Every weekend I'm going to start a thread on the Ice Cream Fitness Facebook page, which I link in most of the videos down below. So if you are interested in asking a question that you would like me to answer on Mondays, post it up in the thread there on the weekend, and I will select a few of those and try to briefly answer them as best I can for you guys every Monday. But hold on, let me give you guys a bicep shot before I get into these questions. Alright, the first question asks, do you use BMR and take a certain amount of calories away from it to cut? And if not, how? Actually, no. BMR is your base metabolic rate, and that is the amount of calories that you would burn if you laid in bed for 24 hours a day and didn't get up to eat, use the restroom, or anything else. The moment you get up and do anything else, you're above your BMR. What we use is your TDEE, which is total daily energy expenditure. It's what's used in nutritional science, which you need to calculate to determine your maintenance calories, and that accounts for all of your energy expenditure through the day. And what I recommend for most people is that they start at around a 10% deficit underneath their TDEE, and for most people I would recommend not exceeding a 20% deficit unless you really know what you're doing. Because when you start exceeding that, it becomes a fast cut. You are risking muscle loss, you're risking metabolic damage, you're risking binging and things. So it's something that you need to be very careful with if you try to exceed 20%. Also, I recommend that people do not go underneath their BMR ever. So once you establish your BMR and your TDEE, I recommend that people do not go underneath their BMR. If you need to go underneath that to continue cutting, you either need to add more activity or you need to take a diet break, which I've covered in other videos. The next question, could you clear the air once and for all on the topic of fructose? I'd love to do so. Alright guys, when people are talking about the negative effects of sugar, nutritionally, they are referring specifically to the sugar fructose. They are not talking about other sugars. So you don't even need to concern yourself with the total sugar intake that you have for the day, because most carbs you eat are just sugars anyways. After your body breaks them down, it's not going to affect your body composition. However, fructose seems to be unique in that it requires a slightly different metabolic pathway to process, and chronic excess consumption of it has absolutely been linked to everything from elevated liver enzymes to elevated blood triglycerides, slowed metabolic rate, fatty liver. However, the number there seems to be about 50 grams or more per day of chronic fructose intake, which is actually a hard number to hit if you're not drinking a lot of liquid sugars. Things like sucrose, which is table sugar, and high fructose corn syrup, tend to be around 50 to 55%, depending on which one you're using, of their actual sugar content comes from fructose, and the rest is from glucose, which doesn't have these effects. So to hit this sort of number, say purely from table sugar, you would have to consume 100 grams of table sugar a day. That's quite a bit. And to put that in perspective of eating sweets and things, let's say you use ice cream as an example, you would have to eat over 2,000 calories of ice cream a day to even be at risk of this. So it does take quite a bit, unless you're drinking things like sodas or you're just dumping tons of table sugar on your food. So be aware of that around 50 grams per day of chronic intake of fructose starts to cause some metabolic issues in people. Your health markers will decline. It can lead to some metabolic damage. But intakes below that don't seem to have any negative impact. The body processes it just fine, and you do not need to fear fructose in moderation, particularly if you're very active. It's not going to negatively impact your physique or your health at thresholds below that 50 grams. Alright, next question. Oh, this is by a guy named Matthew Eubanks. I like this guy. He has his own YouTube channel also. He puts out some good training videos, and he's a big dude. And he asks, feet in the air while benching. Myth, or does it really work? It works, but I'm not a fan of it, and I'll just briefly cover why. Yes, when you put your feet up on the bench, you remove your ability to use leg drive, and it pulls the posterior chain back out of the bench press, and it allows you to focus a bit more on the chest and the primary movers. However, I really see the bench press as a power movement, and I really don't want to do that when doing the bench press, because there are other lifts that you can use to replicate the same effect even better than what you get while putting your feet up on the bench. And those two lifts would be, one, the floor press, and two, full range of motion dumbbell bench pressing, where you bring the dumbbells all the way down and you work the bottom of the movement heavily. Those two movements can achieve the same effect you're trying to get out of there, and I think they do it better. So that would be my choice. And the other issue I have with people putting their feet up on the bench is that they usually do it in conjunction with some type of guillotine press, to where you're pressing almost to the neck. And as a general rule, when you're bench pressing or doing any type of press, putting the bar anywhere above the nipple line or moving your elbows further than 45 degrees up from the body puts a huge amount of shearing stress on your rotator cuffs. This is how people get shoulder injuries, and this is how people tear pecs easily when they're benching heavy. So for safety purposes, I don't recommend doing that, and you need to be aware of that. All right, the next question, best way to minimize fat gain after a bench. My advice there is not to bench. I think that once you've gone ahead and binged, you need to go ahead and live with it. Don't try to correct it after the fact, because you're not going to be able to effectively do so. And if you do so, what you do is that you're establishing a negative eating pattern, and you actually will start establishing a binge type eating disorder if you start trying to regularly just correct it when you binge. And when people take these extreme measures, that's exactly what happens. They then put themselves into a cycle where they're more likely to binge again, because the extreme measures make them want to binge that they use afterwards. It creates a psychological situation to where they want to do the binge again because they feel so deprived, because they've done something like a ton of fasted cardio or something else to try to minimize the damage from the binge. And so then they set up a cycle to where they then binge and then take an extreme measure to adapt, and it creates a very, very negative cycle. So I recommend not doing anything special after the fact, just living with it and moving on. What I would recommend is that if you are feeling the need to binge on your diet, whether you're cutting or bulking or whatever you're doing, you need to step back and assess your diet and ask, what are you doing that's making you need to binge? Is your calorie deficit too large? And that's one of the biggest problems with running a large calorie deficit. And you end up undoing most of the benefits that you had from doing the bigger cut and losing weight quicker. So not only do you risk the metabolic damage, but then you risk binging and not really getting anything out of it, because in a single binge, sometimes you can undo 3, 4, sometimes a full week of your cut just from the surplus you hit on a big binge. So you need to look at that, and then two, you need to step back and ask, is your diet too restrictive? Have you restricted foods that you enjoy, and instead of eating them in moderation and making them fit into your macros and your calories, have you completely removed the foods that you enjoy and therefore created a situation where you feel deprived and then you want to binge because your diet itself is too restrictive? So those would be the factors that I would look at, and then focus on removing the need to binge in the future rather than try to correct the binge and create a never-ending vicious cycle. As I said earlier, if any of you guys want to get your questions answered, go ahead and ask them on the Ice Cream Fitness Facebook page, which I will link down below. I hope this has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.